it's the same with food. When we say we can't have cheese anymore, but we really fucking love cheese, guess what happens? We're going to binge on the cheese when we get a chance. And so this is why most diets fail for people, is because our body will fight tooth and nail against this sensation of restriction, physiological restriction in the body, but also psychological restriction.
I was really excited to have this conversation with you because I think nutrition, dieting, which is such a taboo word these days, is so important. Particularly, I feel like we've had enough conversations, maybe not enough is not the right word, but we've had a lot of conversations around nutrition and dieting for women, but for men, we still shy away from the conversations around that. Right? Because we think unless you're some bodybuilder who's in the gym all the time, the average Joe, just doesn't pay attention to their nutrition.
Right.
And it's such a fallacy. It's such a problem.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to try to change the narrative on that. So before we jump into that, Abby, welcome to the Gents Talk podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting. I appreciate it.
No, of course. I'm glad you're here. For those who aren't familiar with Abby and the work that you do, maybe a little brief background for us.
Yeah, so I'm a registered dietitian. I have been a YouTuber and a TikToker and a blogger in the early days of blogging, the OG days, for 15 years. So early adopter in that space. But more than anything, I'm a nutrition and food and science communicator. That's really how I see myself. Not an influencer. That I'm a dietitian first and foremost. And so my approach to nutrition has always been kind of like a quote unquote non-diet additive approach. So I don't believe in restricting yourself to the point of you feeling miserable, right? Like life is too short, right? So nutrition shouldn't just be about deprivation and denial. It really isn't, right? And your diet shouldn't be the most interesting thing about you. It shouldn't be your whole personality. As we see, it has become, for so many people, right? Like, nutrition and food has become as divisive as politics and religion in a lot of cases. It has become people's religion in some ways. And I think that's dangerous because, we are more than what we eat, contrary to that, popular adage where we are more than what we eat, so much more. So my approach as a registered dietitian has always been that of an additive approach. So rather than thinking about all the things we need to take away from our diet, I'm all about what can we add to our diet, and to kind of think about nutrition from a place of abundance rather than from a place of denial.
How do we shift our mentality in that regard?
Yeah, so it can be so hard, especially in the age of social media where basically everyone's telling you to cut this. And, there's a new diet every day. I always joke that back when I was studying nutrition, this was like, 15, almost 20 years ago, it's like there was basically it was pretty black and white what good nutrition was. Now it's like, well, you got the carnivore people who are claiming that, you got to go carnivore. Then you have the raw frugivore people who are saying, no, you should only eat raw fruit. And it's like, what do you believe? It's very overwhelming for the lay person to make informed decisions about what is the quote unquote best way to eat. And so that's really where I come in because, I try to help demystify these things, and to try to help people make sense of it all because nutrition is constantly evolving. But at the end of the day, it's kind of simple, right? It's more simple than what the influencers are trying to make it out to be and sensationalize it to be. And it really comes down to, again, shifting that mentality from a place of let's cut out all of these food groups to how do we add things to our diet? And so, for me, I developed a framework called the Hunger Crushing Combo, which is a concept that I have trademarked. I utilize. People know me for it. And the idea is that rather than cutting all these foods out and saying, oh, you can't have that, you can't have this, you can't have that, we're adding in a source of fiber, protein, and healthy fats. Those are the hunger crushing compounds that I talk about in my HCC, as I call it, my hunger crushing combo. And what that does is that shifts us away from a place of thinking about, oh, what do we need to take away, to a place of what are we adding to our meals and snacks to make them more satiating, make them more satisfying. And so at the end of the day, we're getting better balanced blood sugars. We're getting a much better chance at regulating our weight and managing our weight because we're feeling fuller on potentially fewer of those what I call naked carbs. So, the naked refined carbs, you're edging some of those out by adding in protein and fiber and healthy fats. And you're kind of putting food on an even playing field. And again, this comes back to that mentality shift, because I always say that, foods may not be nutritionally equal, but we can make them morally equal by essentially getting rid of that dichotomous thinking of good, bad, clean, junk, and thinking instead about this is just food. And if I want white pasta, like a naked carb, that's an example of a naked carb, have the white pasta, but dress it up with some protein and some vegetables in there, maybe some olives or cheese. And suddenly you've got a way more satiating meal that actually kind of edges out some of those refined carbs without you even getting in your head that you're depriving yourself. So it is a mind shift that has so many more benefits to just staying full.
Okay, I got a lot of questions now.
Yeah, get at me.
Let's start with the naked carbs.
Yeah.
That's a great concept. Can you give us other examples of naked carbs?
Yeah, so, naked carbs are all the carbohydrates that basically are usually more refined or fast-acting carbs that give you a shot of energy and then kind of you crash right back down. So white carbs, white rice, white bread, candy, like juice,
stuff with lots of sugar.
Basically stuff that has more sugar or carbohydrates that don't have the fiber to slow it down. They don't have protein in there to slow it down. So typically it's those kinds of quote unquote junk foods that people get in their head, usually with diets, that they can't have anymore. And again, my framework is stop thinking about all the things you can't have, because as soon as you think that in your head, you're going to want it more, right? It's human nature. When you tell a teenager, no, you can't wear that crop top to school, what do you think she's going to do? She's going to put the damn crop top on, because we like to rebel against rules.
Right.
And so it's the same with food. When we say we can't have cheese anymore, but we really fucking love cheese, guess what happens? We're going to binge on the cheese when we get a chance. And so this is why most diets fail for people, is because our body will fight tooth and nail against this sensation of restriction, physiological restriction in the body, but also psychological restriction, right?
And there's a problem with the yo-yo dieting, right?
100%.
Like when you go on a diet and then you're off the diet, on the diet, off the diet. That can't be good for your body.
It's not good for the body. And typically what we see is when people lose weight in, let's say, a not very healthy fashion, they're losing a lot of weight very quickly. They can't maintain it, obviously, because again, sometimes these very restrictive diets, you can't maintain them. That's life, right? You're human. And they not only will gain the weight back, but they typically will gain more weight back. And there's many reasons for this, a lot of different compensatory mechanisms that happen in the body physiologically, slowing down metabolism, slowing down NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically all the unconscious movements that you do. So like you might fidget less, or you might want to stand less. You don't even think about those things, but those are things that burn calories, and you'll start doing less of those when you're kind of restricting calories. And your hunger hormones go through the roof, your satiety hormones drop. And so there's all these things going on in your body to scream at you, gain that weight back right now. I'm not happy with you being hungry.
Right.
And so and you do, as soon as you give in, because again, you're human. Eventually, if you love cheese, you're going to eat the damn cheese, and then you go hog wild. And, I always call this the Last Supper mentality. We see it all the time. You finally give in, you have the cheese, and you go, oh shit, I'm just going to eat all the ice cream in the freezer. I'm going to go through all the chips in the pantry and clear the fridge because diet starts again tomorrow. And when you do that enough times, that just becomes this vicious binge, restrict, repent, repeat cycle. That's very hard for people to get out of without like nipping it in the bud with this restrictive diet mentality.
So are carbs evil?
No, absolutely not. And that's something that's really important that I want people to get out of their head, is because yes, diet culture has painted carbs as the devil, and it's just getting worse and worse with social media and a lot of the messages out there. But carbs are really important. Like, carbs are our brain's preferred source of fuel. Our body loves carbs. We thrive on carbs. Carbs are very important. But what happens when you consume, let's say, a piece of candy, which is a great example of, a naked carb because it's pure sugar basically, is you're going to get a spike in energy, and that's quick, fast acting carbs, and also a blood sugar spike. And it's just going to crash right back down. And if you're doing that all day, you're not going to feel your best. Like, your energy is going to be completely out of whack. Yep. Your hormones are going to be out of whack, and you're hungry all the time. You're going to be thinking about food all the time. And eventually you're just going to eat more calories than your body actually needs, because you're kind of constantly pacifying this, like, hungry, not hungry, hungry, not hungry, hungry, not hungry. So no, carbs are absolutely not bad. But when we take a naked carb like candy and we add something to it, like let's say we have some candy, but we also have some Greek yogurt, and we have, like a clementine, or we make a little snack pack out of it, then we're slowing that blood sugar curve. We're increasing our satiety level for longer. So we're not getting that up and down, up and down. And that little piece of candy in the grand scheme of your day is really no big deal. It's just when we're constantly chasing the hunger with these tiny blips of short acting energy, that's when we run into problems.
So then what would you say to folks who swear by the keto diet, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question. Nothing against folks who have success on the keto diet. There is evidence to support a keto diet, because
I've had success on it.
You've had success, yeah.
So this was a few years back. I was very carb heavy.
Yeah.
I come from a Middle Eastern background. All of our food is laced with like a disproportionate amount of carbs, followed by a small amount of protein.
Right.
And it's always just rice, potatoes, that kind of thing. And at one point I was about 210 and started the keto diet. Was admittedly extreme with it, in the sense of I was like, carbs, not even close, not coming close to them. And I dropped to about 160 within the span of maybe 4 months. Now, I was also doing high intensity training 4 or 5 times a week.
Right.
So there was a lot of other factors involved in it, but I also felt great right after that. So I find, and I guess I'm trying to discover or understand whether, keto is a temporary measure or whether it's a sustainable measure, because it's vilified quite a bit. It's either you swear by it or you hate it.
Yeah. And I don't feel either of those things, right? Like, at the end of the day, whether it's, I always say a diet, particularly one that you're hoping to maintain or lose weight on, it has to be, you have to be able to do it for life. If you can't do it for life, don't even bother. Because as soon as you come off of keto, unless you have put into place another measure to create a calorie deficit, you're probably going to start to gain the weight right back. I don't know if that was your experience.
That did happen. Yeah. I mean, the pandemic kind of messed it all up.
Yeah.
So.
You and everybody else. So
can't go to the gym anymore.
Exactly.
And it's just cheaper to order food.
Yep.
And,
hard to order keto on Uber Eats.
100%. Yeah.
So, I mean, like, the keto diet has some great benefits to it. Like, there is some great blood sugar management benefits. So for folks with insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, but it is being shown in research to be very hard for people to maintain long term. And they will get that immediate hit of satisfaction and gratification because they will lose weight quickly. A lot of that's going to be water weight as you kind of plow through your glycogen stores. But after that, yes, you're going to lose weight because fat is super satiating, as we've established. And it's very hard to like overeat a lot of meat, for example, because you just feel so full on in it, as opposed to like rice and potatoes, which is much more easy. Yeah. So it is an effective weight loss strategy. But the problem we see in the research is people just can't sustain it because it doesn't really jive with most people's lifestyles.
It's, like you said, it's very hard to just walk
hard.
into a restaurant today and be like, I need to stay keto, unless
100%.
you're ordering the $80 steak.
Exactly.
And that's it.
And that's it. Because, you're not, meals are typically based around carbohydrates, especially when we eat out. And the other thing is, like, for a lot of folks, they struggle with, like, getting enough fiber in. And as you probably know, as being part of the keto community, there's, like, the dirty keto or whatever you want to call it, and like the clean keto, as people like call it. I hate those terms, but that's kind of, that's what people say. And so obviously it's more advantageous to be consuming avocados and olives that as your fat sources than it is to be just eating like bacon and butter. Right. So like, it's again, within the keto diet, there's huge variations in, how effective or healthy it can be. But yeah, it works great for some people, at least in the short term. I don't know a lot of people. Actually, I don't know anyone who has been able to maintain it for like more than a year.
Yeah, it's certainly hard. The restaurant component is challenging. When you go to other people's houses, you're the person sitting there going, I'm sorry, I can't eat A, B, C, and D type of thing. So I've, in my own journey, decided I was going to reintegrate carbs, but at a very minimal level, because I also noticed I don't like the feeling of getting sluggish and tired afterwards. I don't enjoy that dip. Yeah. And I found that has been working for me. But I've also, in my own research, and you're the expert, so correct me if I'm wrong, have also come to understand that there are between, like, in the spectrum of carbs, there are good carbs that you can have, like sweet potato, for example, and then on the other side is kind of like the white rice that you mentioned. The
naked carbs. And so again, that really comes down to this framework of thinking about, well, the sweet potatoes or the whole grains and the quinoa, like those are bound up with hunger crushing compounds. They've got protein in them in the case of quinoa, and they've got fiber in them, obviously, in sweet potatoes and in quinoa. And so it's going to slow down the blood sugar response. So you're not going to get that huge spike and dip that you would from like white rice. But if you're if you love your white rice, because like I'm a dietitian, I don't like quinoa. I'm just going to say it. I know we're supposed to love quinoa, but I don't like quinoa. And so I like white rice. That's okay. In my framework, it's like, if that's your thing, just dress up the white rice by throwing in, some ground turkey, like make a little fried rice situation, some eggs, throw your vegetables in there. And now you're not getting that big spike. You've added in all the hunger crushing compounds, and you're going to help to stabilize those blood sugars.
What's the role of fiber in all of this?
So,
we grow up being told fiber is important, but not a lot of people understand what fiber actually does for the body.
Totally. Fiber is so important. And unfortunately, most North Americans do not get nearly enough fiber. So
how much do we need?
We're supposed to be getting about 25 to 38 grams per day. Most people are getting maybe half that.
Okay.
And so what fiber does, there's lots of different roles of fiber, so we have different types of fiber, but generally it's really good for your heart because it helps to reduce high cholesterol, for example, and very important for gut health because it promotes regularity, also helps with satiety, which is important for weight management. And, one thing that we're really getting interested in the world of nutrition research is gut health, right? Gut health is huge right now for good reason, in my opinion. And so fiber is what we call a prebiotic. So we hear about prebiotics, we hear about probiotics. Prebiotics is the fuel, the food for the bacteria, for the probiotics. And that's what fiber does. It feeds the good bacteria in our gut. Really super duper important. And obviously we get fiber from fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, things, nuts, seeds. Those are some of our like typical best sources. And that's one of my issues, like with some forms of a keto diet, especially like a dirty keto diet, is like, where's the fiber? Like you gotta really make sure you're getting in those fiber sources when you aren't having carbs. Because it's very hard to meet that 30 grams of fiber without carbs.
And that's per day. That's not per meal.
Oh yeah, that's per day.
Yeah.
30. If you had 30 grams in fiber in one meal, you'd be very bloated. you would be like 6 months pregnant bloated, right? But yeah, gut health is so important. The health of our gut microbiome affects the health of every other bodily system, right? 70% of our immune system is housed in our gut. 50% of our brain's dopamine is produced in the gut. So there's a huge connection between mental health and gut health.
Interesting.
Also, this is an interesting factoid. Our body weight is also impacted by our gut microbiome. So we have some really interesting research looking at larger body folks and thin body folks and the difference in their microbiome composition. And we see that there's a stark difference in what that microbiome looks like in a larger body person versus a thin person. And we don't know what comes first, if it's the chicken or the egg, if they're born like this, or if it's because of having these more high fiber foods in the diet that gives that more beneficial bacteria composition in the gut. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that if we have a really healthy, varied gut microbiome, those bacteria actually help to gobble up some of the calories that we eat. So it's like a tug of war in our body. Let's say we eat an apple. If we were to eat an apple, our gut microbiome is going to actually gobble up some of the available calories in that apple. So if someone like me that has, let's say, a healthy gut microbiome were to eat an apple, 100-calorie apple, I might actually only utilize 80 of those calories, where somebody with a less healthy gut microbiome would utilize the full 100. So this is another reason why taking care of your gut can actually help to lower your body weight and help to support weight loss, because we're not absorbing all the calories that we consume.
Right. That's
so
interesting.
That's
because,
really cool.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people think about how if I'm understanding this correctly, if somebody is struggling with their weight and they eat something that may not necessarily, like an apple, you don't think is going to be the worst thing for you, but your body doesn't process it the same way somebody who is in a healthier position would.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just with apples. Like if we look at something like more heavily refined foods, like, if we were to McDonald's and like have a bunch of like fries, or like these naked carbs we were talking about, naked carbs don't have really any fiber. So there's nothing really for the gut microbiome to feed on. So all of those calories are getting utilized by our body. Whereas an apple, which has fiber, or, quinoa, which has fiber, that's kind of creating a bit of a feast for our gut microbes, which then is going to reduce how many calories we're actually getting.
Yeah.
So yeah, very important to take care of our gut. So to do that, a few things, stress is very important, stress management.
Yep.
Getting a good sleep, also really important.
What happens if you don't get enough sleep on a regular basis?
Well, our cortisol levels are going to rise, and it also really heavily affects our hunger hormones. It just kind of creates general inflammation in the body. And, sleep is so underrated and so vital. If you're not sleeping well, doesn't matter what else is happening, you're not going to feel your best. Mm-hmm. You're going to be hungry when you shouldn't be. And your blood sugars may be out of whack, your hormones may be out of whack. And, generally you kind of get into this terrible cycle of not sleeping well, not feeling your best, eating poorly, and it kind of just cycles on like that. It's a repeating problem that a lot of people are struggling with, especially now being so busy.
I just came back from Italy.
Yeah.
And had a lot of white naked carbs.
Yes.
Pasta, pizza, you name it. But I didn't feel as bloated, as full as I would if I had a quarter the portion I had here. Mm-hmm. Is there something to be said about the quality of the food we have in North America versus other parts of the world? Like, is there really a difference between them? Or is it just in our minds?
We don't have the research to say for sure. And this has always been, there's lots of hypotheses on this. There's lots of speculation. And I think at the end of the day, like, there's a few things that are at play. One, a lot of the pasta in Italy is like homemade. So what is it? It's like flour and water, maybe eggs, but like typically that's what it is, a pinch of salt. Whereas like a lot of the pasta we're having here may be designed to have a longer shelf life. There may be additives. And so it also might be the quality of the wheat used. I can't say for sure because it really depends on where that wheat's coming from. But the more likely culprit, in my opinion, is you're on holiday. You are relaxed. You are enjoying your life. You are probably walking more. You are, feeling your best versus like being stuck at home, just like wolfing down food in a rush. Stress plays such an important role in our gut and how we feel. Like I said, there's a huge connection between the gut and the brain. It's called the brain-gut axis. And so when you are feeling stressed, your digestion will be off. You will be more bloated. You will be more constipated. You will feel just like more sluggish in general. And so something can be said for going on vacation, eating your face off, and like living your life. You're not stressed about the carbs. You're not stressed about dieting. You're not stressed about gaining weight. You're walking more, and you're relaxed. And I do think that that plays an important role. I can't say what the relative role between that and the quality of the food is, because we haven't really gotten any good, like, good data to tease that apart. But I think that for me, when I travel, my digestion is amazing. Doesn't matter where I am in the world, not just Italy, could be anywhere, even in the States where the food is arguably worse than it is here. So,
the portions are big.
Exactly. So I think that does often play a bit of a role.
So stress is the element there.
Stress is a really big element to everything that goes on in the body, for sure.
So I think that's a nice reminder for anyone who's struggling with their digestion or noticing that they're eating erratically or a lot more, is to take stock of where they're at mentally.
100%. And obviously that's easier said than done, right? Like when people say, oh, just don't be stressed, you're like, well, how do I stop that?
Yeah. I think we're all looking for that magic pill.
Like, welcome to, being a millennial in 2024. But like, I think it's, for a lot of people, it is a big challenge for a lot of people right now. Yeah.
What about things like coffee?
Yeah.
There seems to be, I'm not a coffee drinker.
Okay.
I've never been. I just don't enjoy the taste. And I've seen how people are when they're off coffee and how they just look very antsy, angry almost. But I've also heard that coffee can be good for you.
Yeah.
Can we just sort of better understand, or at least for me, better understand the benefits of coffee and where it could also be bad for you? Because I've also heard it can be bad for you.
Yeah. I mean, the dose makes the poison is what I think is a really important takeaway for anything. Anytime you hear someone on the internet say, oh, X, Y, and Z is bad for you, you should be asking the question, at what dose? The dose makes the poison. So coffee actually has a lot of great benefits. It's packed with antioxidants, not unlike, green tea, for example, which green tea has the health halo, but coffee has tons of antioxidants as well, very unique antioxidants, not unlike red wine and all of those. So there may be some benefits for heart health there. I believe there's also some research, even though it can transiently kind of give you a blip, a little bit of a boost in your blood sugars, over time, from what I recall from the research, it may actually help to reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes. So that's an interesting thing. Also, like, for a lot of people, it is what helps them kind of feel energized and help them concentrate in the morning. A lot of folks that are neurodivergent, for example, may rely on a little bit of caffeine just to help with that piece. And in terms of like, when is it not good? It's like, if it's affecting your anxiety and causing you to have the jitters, like it's a good time to cut back. So generally, the recommendation is about 400 milligrams of coffee a day. So about 2, maybe 3 cups of coffee max before you can start to potentially see some of these negative impacts. But this is highly individualized. So like, it depends if you're a fast or a slow caffeine metabolizer. And this is just where it comes down to the person, Ultimately, it is kind of like, it's a stimulant. So for folks who have just come off coffee, like you've just described, like, yeah, they probably are going to be a little bit miserable. Like, I can't even imagine it. So you don't want to be around me. And so, for a lot of people, this is just what like helps them out in the morning. And I always say, I can help you tweak any part of your diet, but I will not tell you to change your coffee order, because that is sacred. It's like part of a ritual for people. It just is what gives them comfort in the morning. Or tea, like whatever your like, drink of choice is. I think that's a sacred piece of like little bit of a ritual, and it helps people kind of get started in the day on a good note. And that alone has some really important power. Obviously, if you're pregnant, I would cut back the research suggests you don't need to eliminate it, but I would keep it to a cup a day. That would be my other suggestion on like when to be more mindful. But if it's affecting your anxiety, like listen to your body.
And what about red wine? You mentioned red wine.
Mm-hmm.
There's the age old, one cup of red wine a night is fine. I don't know if that's true. I certainly drank a lot of it in the last couple of weeks. Yeah. But I'm curious as to where wine plays a role in our diet.
Yeah. So, I mean, like if we look at like the gold standard of nutrition and diets, like the Mediterranean diet, right? Like a lot of our research on nutrition has always kind of circles back to this Mediterranean style of eating as being kind of the gold standard for kind of longevity, for reducing the risk of chronic disease, for reducing the risk of obesity, and things like red wine is a part of that. And so what we see with alcohol is a bit of a J-shaped curve. Because red wine does have some benefits because it's antioxidant rich, we see a bit of a J-shaped curve in the research where a bit is good, but a lot is bad, right? Like, again, the dose makes the poison. And so, I think it comes down to everything in moderation. I generally recommend sticking to no more than a few drinks a week. Our guidelines in Canada used to be much more. I think they were at like 10 drinks for women a week. And now I think they're just down to a few. So
10 seems a little high.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's more than I would recommend, basically. So yeah, I think that, again, I wouldn't make wine your sole source of antioxidants. That's what I always say. Like, don't go out of your way to get your antioxidants from wine. Yeah. There's lots of fruits and vegetables that will provide those same antioxidants. If you like wine, enjoy it in moderation. That's kind of my take home for alcohol. Because
what exactly is the impact of having a lot of alcohol on your gut? We know what it can do to your liver, but from your gut perspective and how that could potentially impact your overall diet, can we talk about that a little bit?
I don't know. I don't know the research, to be honest, on wine specifically and gut health. But
or alcohol in general.
Yeah, even that. Like, I think that generally speaking, wine and alcohol is not providing any fuel for our gut microbiome and our gut microbes. And at the end of the day, we only have a finite amount of calories in the day to meet our nutrient needs without getting ourselves into a calorie surplus. And wine is not arguably going to provide any real nutrition, not just for our gut microbes, but really for anything. So I think that, if our goal is to really support our gut microbiome, then we really want to focus on sources of prebiotics and probiotics. And actually, I just launched my own supplement line a few weeks ago called New Theory. And our first product is a 2-in-1 plant-based probiotic protein powder. So you get 5 billion CFUs of those really important gut supporting probiotics, plus you get, a full dose of complete plant-based protein. Because plant-based, I really do think, forget the carnivores for a second and, the keto for a moment, I really do think that the plant-based movement is not going away anytime soon.
Can you maybe, I love my meat.
Yeah.
And I can't see myself ever moving away from that.
Yep.
But I am genuinely curious when I see, superstar athletes like a Tom Brady say that he's strictly vegan and that he gets every single thing he needs being that way. I'm curious to better understand the plant-based diet, or at least the plant-based nutrition, whatever you want to call it, and what the benefits of that are.
Yeah. Well, again, I myself am not vegan or vegetarian, but I really strongly do believe in a more plant-forward diet. So we have so much evidence that suggests that eating more plant-forward or plant-based, even if it's not 100% vegan, is associated with reduced risk of mortality, longer life, reduced risk of chronic disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, etc. Because plants are very high in phytonutrients and antioxidants, so really important for just overall vitality. Also a really important source of that fiber. That's really where our fiber comes from, plants, right? And so that is feeding our good gut bacteria. And that is, again, very important for overall health. And, the other thing is that by eating more plants, more plant-based protein, we're naturally edging out the saturated fats, the trans fats, you know, a lot of those other kinds of foods that we might find in red meat and things like that, or processed meats that we know are more associated with certain cancers or chronic disease. And generally speaking, like when you're incorporating a lot of these like high fiber bulk foods that are really satiating, like beans and legumes and vegetables and nuts and seeds, you know, you are consuming a very kind of low calorie density diet. So that's where the kind of weight management piece comes into play. And I think there's like this very common misconception that you can't meet your nutrient needs, or specifically that you can't meet your protein needs. Like any vegan will tell you that they go to a family dinner and some aunt or uncle is gonna be like, but where'd you get your protein? You know, like that's just always that's always what they get asked. But there are so many plant-based sources of protein now, between, you know, tofu and other forms of soy and beans and legumes and hemp seeds and protein powder, like I just mentioned. There really are. And, you know, yes, vegan folks do need to do some supplementation like vitamin D, which honestly most omnivores need to do anyways, if not all of us. And B12 is the other very important one. Sometimes iron, depends on the diet. But for the most part, it's easier now than ever to maintain a more plant-based diet. And like you know, like I said, I'm not vegan. I don't plan to become vegan anytime soon. But I think that we can reap a lot of these benefits just by incorporating more plant-based meals into our diet. We don't need to go all out. Like, you know, I'm not into extreme diets if they don't feel good to you. Yeah. If they're not something that's going to be sustained and you don't feel passionate about it, don't even bother. So why? Because you're just going to throw in the towel and then, like, you know, it's all or nothing. Yeah. So I would rather people try to incorporate, you know, 1 or 2 more plant-based meals into the week. You know, have the plant-based protein shake and have you know, have some bean chili or something for lunch one day. Just do it very slowly, so that, you know, you feel comfortable with it, and you're probably going to save a lot of money too, because groceries are expensive.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah.
It's expensive to eat meat these days.
It's very expensive to eat meat. So that's what I'm saying. Like with the price of groceries, there's a lot more interest in plant-based alternatives for sure.
Is there for the meat component? I mean, we talked about how, you know, you could be on a carnivore diet.
Yeah.
Right, where all you eat is meats.
Yeah.
What are the risks to that?
Well, the carnivore diet freaks me out. It's like a immediately no for me. You know, it's
why?
Well, you're just eating. First of all, it's the most environmentally unfriendly diet you could imagine, to just eat raw beef and, you know, raw liver and eggs and a stick of butter. It's no.
Wait, sorry. It has to be raw?
No. But I see a lot of the carnivores are promote the raw movement.
I've seen some of those, like, you know, we'll call them public personalities.
Yes.
Who are just sitting there eating
like a raw liver.
Yeah.
It's jarring, to say the least. But for the most part, whether it's cooked or raw, you're not getting any fiber. Like we just, as we mentioned, that is so important. Your gut is so important. And a lot of these influencers who are promoting these strict carnivore diets will often say, oh, you know, I had cystic acne before I had this, you know, this gut problem. I was always bloated. I was all these different like problems that the carnivore diet allegedly solved. And it's interesting. It's a great testimonial. Like it's a great soundbite, but it's not because of it's not because of the meat solving these problems. It's because if you cut out like hundreds of food from your diet and you're literally just eating like eggs, butter, cheese, and beef, then you're very likely in that whole selection of foods that you've cut out, you're gonna have picked off 1 or 2 things that were causing you a legitimate intolerance or reaction.
Right.
And so that's not how we do proper elimination diets. Like as a dietitian, you know, if you're working with a professional, it should be done in a stepwise sequence so that you are able to identify exactly what the culprit is in exactly what amount you can tolerate. So you don't have to go the rest of your life just eating 5 foods, which A, is so boring,
Definitely not sustainable.
Definitely not sustainable, not for the environment and for your wallet, and is going to actually deplete your gut microbiome over time. So you might feel better at first because, again, you've eliminated whatever trigger was causing you an immediate problem, but over time, it's just going to go downhill. So, yeah, I do not understand the carnivore diet, and I really do feel for a lot of people who've gotten kind of sold this diet by a lot of these influencers online, because it's dangerous and it's not good for anybody.
It is worrisome that anybody with enough of a social following suddenly becomes an expert in something that they have no idea what they're talking about.
Correct.
And then people will go and listen to them, and that can significantly impact their guts, their health overall.
And especially their emotional health. You know, as I'm a dietitian that has worked a lot in the kind of eating disorder space and disordered eating space. And I can't tell you over the years of doing what I do, how many hundreds, if not thousands of messages I've gotten from young girls, like 10, 11, 12, 13, telling me that they followed X, Y, and Z influencers' diet, and now they have a full-blown eating disorder. And they're afraid to eat anything, and they're eating 500 calories, and they're, you know, they can't eat out anymore with their family, and they're hiding food. And this is the kind of messages that I get every single day because of dangerous misinformation online from people and influencers sharing these very dangerous diets and these very dangerous beliefs about food.
What constitutes an eating disorder? At what point do you go, your eating habits mean there's a disorder happening there?
Well, there's specific diagnostic criteria for an actual eating disorder and for the different eating disorders, of course. But generally speaking, you know, this is when it's really starting to interfere with your daily activities of living, right? Like, and arguably, like, some dietitians just don't even have a, like, they don't even have the line. They're like, yeah, if you're purposefully restricting yourself to the point of, like, you know, you are hungry, you're actively losing weight, and you're miserable, and you're thinking about food all the time, that's an eating disorder. Like that's so, you know, it's very hard to classify between eating disorder and disordered eating, and where does the line get crossed? It's really going to depend on the person and what a psychologist would be able to evaluate for that person. But generally speaking, like, if you're obsessing over food and it's like, this is taking up a significant part of your day and it's a huge mental burden, I would say that's really getting into some dangerous territory. That's not just, I'm on a diet.
Right.
And it can be a real slippery slope for a lot of people. Like, some people can go on a diet and just, like, live their life. And if they mess up one day, it's not a big deal. They don't feel like they're the worst person in the world. Somebody else may slip up and they internalize that. They hate themselves. They punish themselves. They make them go on the treadmill for 3 hours. They don't eat the next day. Like, that's not normal. That's when, you know, a weight loss diet just might not be indicated for that person.
How about snacking? I have a very weird relationship with snacking. I can have a full meal and then immediately afterwards want to find something to snack on. And so I find when I'm bored, I snack.
So here's a question. When you have the full meal, is there something that's missing in that full meal that you are like, I'm craving something still?
I don't think so, because I could literally order something that's satiating.
Yeah.
Like, I could literally order a burger, some fries, and a drink.
Yeah.
And then immediately following that, I need to snack on something. And then I'll go to the cupboards and I'll look for something to snack on, whether it's popcorn and it's not always junk that I'm snacking on, right? Like, it could be nuts, it could be almonds, it could be whatever. But I just need to I need to snack on something. So I don't know how to stop that.
We call that mouth hunger. And so, you know, there's different types of hunger. So there's, like, stomach hunger. You're, like, physically hungry. Your stomach's growling, etc. There's, you know, and there's heart hunger, which is more like an emotional craving. And then there's mouth hunger. Like, you just want to crunch. You just want to bite something. You just want to, like, chew on something, right? Like, it's very common. You know, people love crunchy snacks for a reason. And I don't think there's anything wrong with snacking. I think that the word snack has, again, become this dirty word affiliated with junk food again. But at the end of the day, like I see a snack as just a mini meal. And if you need a snack to fill the void between A and B, then you should honor that and, choose a snack that you feel is fulfilling emotionally and physically. And so when I build out snacks, again, I like to think about my hunger crushing combo. So like if it's popcorn, popcorn's a great snack because it's packed with fiber. But like if you really want a really satiating snack, like let's pair the popcorn with some almonds or pistachios or something like that. Suddenly you've got a much more satiating snack that's going to hold you longer. So you don't have that incessant nagging coming back being like, I think I'm just going to go back to the pantry for round 3, so I think that we need to stop demonizing snacks because they can be a really important tool in the toolbox. And a lot of people need snacks. There's nothing wrong with snacking. I, for one, Diet Culture 101 will say, don't eat after 7 p.m. or something. Like everything will go to fat. Like I need a snack before bed. If I don't,
true,
no, it's not true.
Okay.
I can explain where that comes from in a moment, but so just don't let me forget to. But generally speaking, some people just need a snack before bed or a snack between lunch and dinner in order to prevent them from like getting to dinner and then like plowing through the bread before they even serve the meal. As for the nighttime snacking question, so it's really interesting because we could talk about intermittent fasting for a second, right?
I was going to ask you about that.
So this ties into intermittent fasting because, intermittent fasting is because it's had its moment again the past 5 years, and the hardcore intermittent fasters will insist that IF is magic basically because it allegedly helps suppress our insulin levels. And as they love to point out that insulin is the big bad fat storage hormone. And in some cases, like it's not untrue because if your insulin levels are high, anytime you eat anything with calories, your insulin levels rise. So if you're constantly eating all day long, you're just grazing, your insulin levels are going to stay high. And when your insulin level is high, it says to your body, oh, there's fuel here, so you don't need to burn anything for fat. Like we got fuel on board, we're good.
Yeah.
So in that sense, some might say, oh, well, it's preventing you from burning into your fat stores. Except, or you're going to, store it as fat. You won't store anything as fat if you are not in a calorie surplus. And if you are in a calorie deficit, you will burn into that fat. So at the end of the day, intermittent fasting, if it works, it comes down to a calorie deficit. And if you skip breakfast, you're creating a calorie deficit, right? If we skip a meal, we're not great at making up for it. We might make up a little bit for it and eat a bigger lunch, but the data and the research shows us that we still do end up with a net calorie deficit, just kind of naturally by skipping breakfast.
Right.
But the thing about the night eating, which is interesting, is that most intermittent fasters, what do? They have breakfast or they start their meal at 12 and they maybe eat till 6 to 8.
Yeah.
That's not actually the way to properly intermittent fast if you actually want to get the benefits out of fasting.
Okay.
If that's the case, you would actually want to flip it and eat your calories earlier on in the day, because based on our circadian alignment and circadian rhythm, we are more insulin sensitive early on in the morning when we wake up, meaning we're able to metabolize and utilize carbohydrates and fuel much more efficiently. So if you really wanted to get that extra boost out of the intermittent fasting regimen, you would actually want to eat an early breakfast and then stop eating at noon. But nobody wants to do that. Why would you want to do that? Because then you're not going to see any friends ever.
Yeah.
You're not going, you go in a restaurant, just sit there and drink water, pretty miserable. So that's why I'm always okay, intermittent fasting is just creating a calorie deficit.
Okay.
If it works for you and you are not overdoing it by the time you get to lunch, great. But when we look at the research, it's interesting because yes, most people lose weight. Some people lose no weight because they just make up those calories at lunch and dinner. And some people gain weight because they get so hungry in the morning. They're like, okay, it's 12 o'clock. And then they just binge.
Right.
Right. So it really depends on the person.
So don't blame the tool essentially.
Don't blame the tool. It's not that it didn't fail. It's just that like it's going to work for some people because some people just don't really like eating breakfast.
Yeah.
They're okay to do that. And some people wake up ravenous and it's not a good diet for them.
Yeah.
And the research shows there's no difference really at the end of the day between continuous calorie counting and intermittent fasting when it comes to weight loss. So they are the same.
That's interesting because for me, I don't eat breakfast in general. My first meal is usually around 12, maybe 1, depending on the day. And then I try to have dinner around 7 where possible, just because I don't want to go to sleep feeling like full and whatnot. So by just natural lifestyle, I've started intermittent fasting.
Right. And you're the kind of person who this would be advantageous for or would be natural for, right? You know, a diet has to feel like something that you can incorporate into your life for life, like forever.
Well, what about the shift workers, the people who are working like nurses, cops, firefighters, the people that are working random hours and it's not consistent and they're constantly eating at different times? I can't imagine that could be good for your...
It's not, unfortunately. And that's why we do have lots of evidence that shift workers have higher rates of chronic disease and higher rates of obesity because, again, the circadian rhythm, it's not normal in our body's mind to be eating all of our meals in the middle of the night when our body actually wants to be sleeping. Right. And you can only dupe your body so much, right? Like we live in a place where the sun is up in the day and it's dark at night, and that is to help regulate our hormones, our melatonin, our cortisol, like all these our hunger hormones. All of these become out of whack and like jumbled up basically when we try to flip the script. So unfortunately, this is it's people's reality, and they have to work with what they've got and do the best that they can. But it unfortunately, it makes, in that scenario, it may make it harder for them to maintain a healthy diet and weight. Also, when you're tired and you're doing shift work, are you always the most motivated to eat your meal prepped meal?
No. You're gonna want that McDonald's.
You want whatever donuts are at the hospital that some patient brought in. And so that's another piece that I think people,
You mentioned fiber, protein, healthy fats.
Yeah.
What's an example of healthy fats?
Yeah, so healthy fats are those typically the more unsaturated fats. So like avocado is a great example, nuts, seeds, flax, hemp hearts, omega-3 rich foods like salmon have some great healthy fats, olive oil. So typically those are your kind of healthy fats.
Okay.
Those are the ones that I typically like to recommend people integrate more often, as opposed to, let's say, like the saturated fats you can find in like red meat, which, the research on that is shoddy at best, but with red meat specifically, we know that we're better served with like unsaturated fats for sure. So that's typically what I recommend because they're very satiating and they're packed with lots of other really important antioxidants that, again, are really key for overall health.
So if someone comes to you and says, I need help regulating my diet or putting together a plan, what does that process look like?
Well, personally, I don't work clinically with one-on-one anymore. I solely work in nutrition, in nutrition media, and also now I've owned this new supplement company, New Theory. But for a lot of my colleagues who do, it's interesting because people will always come forward and say, I want a meal plan. Everyone wants a meal plan. Mm-hmm. But what all my colleagues and RD colleagues will say is, I don't like giving meal plans because it doesn't teach it doesn't teach them how to actually eat well.
Right.
It just says, follow these 3 meals and come back to me in a week and we'll tweak them. Like, that's not real life, especially when you have a family to feed that has their own, their own preferences, their own shticks, their own, dietary restrictions. And that's just not the way life is.
Yeah.
Food and life is messy. It's spontaneous. It's unpredictable sometimes. And so I think what's much better for a lot of folks is to just kind of try to help them learn the building blocks. And that's really why I teach it as the hunger crushing combo, because these are the building blocks to help people piece together healthy meals with the things that they already love, like the things that they are already used to eating. For example, like your cultural foods may be different than mine. So oftentimes it doesn't make sense for, a dietitian like me to be like telling you, oh, I don't want you to eat any of your cultural foods anymore. I want you to just eat avocado toast and, Greek yogurt and chicken breast, because that's what I'm eating, So I think that it's much better to work with the individual, find out what they love, what their, typical meals look like, and work with them to see, okay, how do we tweak this to actually make it more nutritious, to kind of shift the proportions, to edge out some of those naked carbs by adding in the hunger crushing combo.
Wow. I feel like I learned a lot.
I'm glad.
We blew past this, or through this rather. So I feel like a part 2 will be needed at some point.
Sure, anytime.
But before I let you go, I got to know one more thing. If someone listening to this, watching this, goes, okay, I need to pay more attention to my nutrition intake, what's step 1?
Yeah, so, if you have access and availability, I always recommend working one-on-one with a registered dietitian. This is the best way for you to get individualized advice that works for you, not what works for an influencer on TikTok or, what works for your brother or sister or someone else who swears by a program that they did. Everybody's going to be unique, and everyone's, outcomes and their preferences and desires and restrictions should be integrated into a plan. So if you have the access, I recommend seeing a professional dietitian. If not, you can follow me at Abby's Kitchen. It's always a great, we've got tons of evidence-based information that I really do direct at the masses. And my other advice is to, unfollow all the kind of unregulated gurus out there that you feel may be giving triggering or restrictive advice out there. There's a lot of that going around, and it's best if it doesn't feel right, if it feels restrictive, it feels like it might trigger you to make poor choices for your health, mental health or physical health. Scroll by, unfollow. I think that's the best case of the kind of course of action.
Amazing. Abby, thank you so much for coming through.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
This was great. I hope this was super insightful for everyone the way it was for me. I'm glad I was just sitting here listening. I was like, oh, okay. And I know that food in general is something that we have a habit of shoveling down in abundance, but we don't really put enough thought into what we're eating. And I think that's something that as a society we need to do better at. But individually speaking, I know that it's something that I've been consciously trying to focus more and more on.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, thank you so much for coming, and let's do this again.
Let's do it.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for listening, everybody.